The waiting room smelled like crayons and disinfectant, and the specific kind of cold air that hospitals run through their vents to keep parents alert. And my daughter was asleep against my shoulder with her cheek pressed flat, and her small hand curled inside the collar of my shirt, and the receptionist was saying a name I had not heard out loud in 4 years and 7 months. Dr. Ivor will see you now. I had ghosted that name in March of the year my daughter was conceived. I had blocked the number, packed a suitcase, and disappeared into a different city with the worst kind of cowardice. And now her own office was the second door on the left. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Tell us where you are watching from, and subscribe. I did not move from the waiting room chair for 9 seconds. I counted the seconds because counting was the only thing my body still knew how to do. The rest of me had gone somewhere I could not reach, somewhere behind my ribs, somewhere small and held very tightly, somewhere I had been keeping certain things for the past 4 years and 7 months and had hoped I would never have to open again. My daughter shifted against my collarbone. Her hair smelled like the baby shampoo I had been buying since she was 8 weeks old, and her breath was warm against my throat. And she was 3 years and 9 months old and entirely innocent of everything that had just happened in this waiting room. I had not chosen this clinic. The clinic had chosen us. The pediatrician we had been seeing in the suburb where we lived had retired in the spring, and the referral had come from her front desk with the brisk efficiency of administrators who did not understand that a name on a referral slip could undo a person at 9:14 on a Tuesday morning. I had not read the name carefully. I had read the address, and the parking situation, and the insurance acceptance, and I had filed the appointment into the calendar without ever looking at the line that said Dr. Ren Ivor, MD, Pediatrics, Northside Children's Practice. I had not looked, because if I had looked, I would have known. The receptionist was a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain and a kind, slightly impatient face. She was looking at me now with the polite question of someone who had said my name twice and was wondering if I needed her to say it a third time. I stood up. My knees worked. My daughter adjusted against my shoulder without waking. I walked across the waiting room in the way you walk, when you are not entirely sure your legs are receiving instructions from your brain. Carefully, planted, one foot then the other, as if the floor might give and you would need to be ready for it. The second door on the left was open. The office inside was small and bright and decorated in the way pediatric offices are always decorated. A wall of bright animal stickers, a low chair shaped like a hippo, a height chart with cartoon giraffes climbing up the side. The exam table had a roll of paper drawn down across it, and a small folded gown waiting in the corner that my daughter would not need today because we were here for a vaccine and not a full physical. The lights were the warm fluorescent of a place that had thought carefully about not scaring children. Ren Ivor was standing at the counter with her back to the door, reading a chart. She had not turned yet. She was wearing a white coat over scrubs the color of slate, and her hair was the same, dark, just past her shoulders, pulled back at the nape with a clip that I recognized because I had bought it for her. I had bought it for her at a market in Lisbon on the last vacation we had taken together, and she had laughed when I gave it to her and said it was too plain and worn it every day for the rest of the trip. She was still wearing it, 4 years and 7 months later. She was still wearing the clip. I had not breathed for several seconds. She turned. I have spent 4 years and 7 months imagining the moment Ren Ivor would see me again. I had imagined it in the shower, in the car at red lights, in the long quiet of the apartment at 2 a.m. when my daughter had finally gone to sleep, and I had the kind of time you have only after midnight when there is nothing left to do but think. I had imagined her angry. I had imagined her cold. I had imagined her looking at me the way you look at someone whose name you no longer say, the way you look at a stranger who happens to share a face with someone you once knew. She looked at me, and her face did not do any of those things. It did the small thing. The thing I had always loved about her face. The way her composure did not crack, did not break, did not perform anything for anyone, but simply moved by a single millimeter behind the eyes, the way the surface of a deep pool moves when something has shifted underneath it. Her jaw set, her hands stilled. Her gaze went from my face to the small dark head against my shoulder and then back to my face, and the line of her mouth, which I had once known better than my own, did the thing it did when she was holding something very still inside herself. She said, "Saram." It was the first time anyone had said my name like that in 4 years and 7 months. Saram. With the second syllable held just a fraction longer than English speakers held it, the way she had always said it, the way I had only ever heard from her. I said, "Ren." My daughter shifted against my shoulder. Ren's gaze went back to her. The smallest possible adjustment. She did not move toward us. She did not step back. She did not do any of the things people do when they are reacting to something. She simply absorbed the information that was being placed in front of her at 9:15 on a Tuesday morning, and her face did the thing it had always done, which was to be exactly as composed as the situation required and 1 degree more. She said, "Please, come in. Close the door." I closed the door. The room was very small. My daughter's name is Vida. She was named after my grandmother, who had been the first woman in my family to leave a country, and the first woman in my family to build a kitchen from nothing in a new one, and who had told me once when I was 9 that the women in our family were good at leaving and bad at staying, and that I would have to decide which one I wanted to be when the time came. I had loved my grandmother. I had also, in March of the year Vida was conceived, leaned heavily on the half of her sentence that justified what I was doing. Ren walked to the small chair beside the exam table and pulled it out and set it gently for me. She did not look at my face while she did it. She was giving me a moment to be a body in a room before she required me to be a person in a conversation. It was the kind of small, specific kindness she had always been capable of, and 4 years and 7 months had not removed it from her. I sat. Vida adjusted on my shoulder, sighed, did not wake. Ren went back to the counter and finished what she had been doing with the chart. She did not perform it. She did not pretend to be reading something. She actually finished the note she had been writing, with the same focused efficiency she brought to everything, and then she set the chart down and turned to face us properly. She said, "How old is she?" I said, 3 years and 9 months. She said, "Name?" I said, "Vida." A pause. She absorbed the name. I watched her absorb it. Vida had been the name of my grandmother. Ren had known that. Ren had met my grandmother once, in the last year of her life, and had sat at the kitchen table with her for 2 hours speaking the kind of careful Spanish Ren had learned in the small classes she took on weekends because she had decided, the second week of our relationship, that she was going to learn enough to talk to my grandmother properly before there was no more time. Ren said, "That's a good name." I said, "Thank you." She said, "You're here for the vaccine?" I said yes. The booster. They sent over the records from her previous pediatrician. She picked up the chart again. Looked at it properly this time. She nodded once. The small, efficient nod of a doctor processing information, and she walked to the small computer at the counter and called up the records on the screen. She read for 30 seconds. Her face did not change. I watched her face anyway. She said, "Has she had any reactions to vaccines previously?" I said, "No." She said, "Any allergies?" I said, "No." She said, "Recent illnesses?" I said, "A cold 3 weeks ago." "Resolved." She said, "Fever in the last 48 hours?" I said, No. She turned from the screen and looked at me. Her face was professional. Her face was the face of Dr. Ren Ivor, MD, who had been a pediatrician at this practice for some number of years, and who was, at this moment, evaluating a patient before administering a routine immunization. Her face was not the face of the woman who had stood in our kitchen in March 4.5 years ago and asked me what was wrong, what had been wrong for 2 weeks, why I had not been sleeping in our bed. Her face was both, actually. The professional one was on top. The other one was underneath. Exactly where she had always kept it, in the small, still place behind her eyes that only ever moved by a millimeter. She said, "I will need to examine her briefly before the vaccine. It is the practice protocol." "May I?" I said. "Yes." She washed her hands. The sound of the water and the soap dispenser was the loudest sound in the room. She dried her hands on the paper towel and stepped to the exam chair and crouched in front of me at Vita's level, the way I had watched her crouch 100 times in front of small dogs and small children and small things in general, because Ren had always understood that going down to someone's level was the first and most important thing you could do for them. She said very softly, "Hello, Vita." Vita opened her eyes. She had Ren's eyes. Not Ren's specifically. The shape of them. The seriousness of them when they first opened from sleep. She had her father's eyes in their color and her mother's eyes in their gravity, and the combination had been, for 4 years and 7 months, the most beautiful and the most accusatory thing in my life. I watched Ren look at my daughter's eyes for the first time, and I watched her face register the seriousness of them, and I watched her not say anything about it, because Ren had never said anything about anything unless it was the moment to say it. Vita looked at her. She was still half asleep. She did not yet know to be shy of strangers in this particular state. Ren said, "I'm Dr. Ivor. I'm going to listen to your heart for a second. Is that okay?" Vita nodded. Ren did the examination quickly and competently, with the small, confident movements of a pediatrician who had done this thousands of times. Stethoscope. Light in the ears, light in the throat. Brief feel of the lymph nodes. She talked to Vita the whole time in the low, calm voice she had once used to talk me down from panic attacks, and Vita, who had inherited at least one of her mother's qualities, which was a calibrated suspicion of strange adults, did not get fussy. She let Ren examine her. She let Ren ask her, when the stethoscope was on her chest, whether her teddy bear's name was Buster, and Vita had said yes, because her teddy bear was indeed named Buster, and Ren had nodded gravely as if this was important medical information. Ren stood up. She said, "She's healthy. We can do the vaccine." I said, "Thank you." She crossed to the supply cabinet and prepared the dose with the same controlled movements. She talked Vita through it. The pinch, the count of 3, the sticker she would get afterward. Vita cried once when the needle went in, a small protest cry rather than a real one, and Ren had a bright pink sticker in her hand before the syringe was on the tray. Vita accepted the sticker. Vita considered the sticker. Vita pronounced it acceptable. Ren said, "You were very brave." Vita said, "I know." The corner of Ren's mouth did the thing, the smallest possible movement. The thing I had once made it my hobby to extract from her, year after year, the way some people collect stamps or rare birds. I had not seen it in 4 years and 7 months. I had not realized until this moment that I had been carrying the absence of it around like something physical, something I had been adjusting my walk to compensate for. Vita settled back against my shoulder, satisfied with the sticker, immediately drowsy again. Ren washed her hands, returned to the chart, made a brief note. She did not look at me while she did this. When she was finished, she turned around. The professional face was still on. She said, "Standard recommendations for after a vaccine. Some soreness at the injection site is normal. Watch for fever above 100.4. Call the practice if anything concerns you. I said, yes. She said, you should book her next routine visit at 6 months from today. I said, yes. She said, the receptionist will help you at the front. I said, yes. We had been looking at each other for 30 seconds. The professional sentences had been laid out between us like a small wall, and we had each placed our bricks in the wall, and we had built it together very carefully, and now it was finished, and we were standing on opposite sides of it. I stood up. Vida shifted on my shoulder. I gathered the diaper bag, the coat, the small stuffed buster who had come to the appointment in case of emergency. I moved to the door. I put my hand on the handle. Ren said, Saram. I stopped. I did not turn around. I could not turn around. Turning around would have required something my legs were not prepared to do. She said, I'd like to ask you a question, if I may. I said, yes. She said, the records. The previous pediatrician. They were from a clinic across town from your former apartment. I said, yes. She said, so you live in this city? A pause. I had thought she would ask the other question. The harder question? The one about the small dark head on my shoulder and the eyes Vida had opened with. She had not asked that question. She had asked the simpler one, which I understood, suddenly, was the harder one, because the simpler one required me to give her an answer she could do something with. I said, yes. We moved back last spring. She said, how long had you been gone? I said, 4 years. A silence. She said, and you are back? I said, yes. She said, thank you for telling me. I said, thank you for asking. I opened the door. I walked out. I walked to the receptionist and made the next appointment with hands that worked the calendar app on my phone the way hands had always worked it. Which was a thing I marveled at, briefly, that the muscle memory of routine adult function was still operating while everything else in me had gone underwater. I scheduled the 6-month follow-up. I confirmed the email on file. I thanked the receptionist. I walked out into the parking lot. I sat in my car for 14 minutes with my hands on the steering wheel, and Vida buckled into her car seat behind me, and I did not start the engine, and I did not cry, and I did not do anything that would have qualified as a response to what had just happened. I sat. I breathed. I looked at the dashboard, which told me the temperature outside was 46 degrees, and the gas tank was half full. I had ghosted Ren Ivor in March 4.5 years ago because I had found out I was pregnant, and I had decided, in a series of catastrophic small decisions that had felt like enormous brave ones at the time, that I could not do to her what was about to happen. The pregnancy had been an accident. The pregnancy had been the result of a brief and stupid period in February when I had let an old friend named Diego come to stay for a week, and I had let him stay too long, and I had let things happen that should not have happened, and I had told myself it was nothing because Ren and I were solid, because Ren and I were forever, because Ren and I had been talking about marriage and children and what kind of life we wanted to build together. Ren and I had been talking about children. Ren had wanted children. I had wanted children. We had been talking, in February of that year, about the conversation we were going to need to have with a clinic about how to make children happen. 2 women together, with the medical pragmatism that 2 women bring to that conversation. And then I had slept with Diego. And then I had taken a test in March because I had been late, and I had taken 3 more tests because I could not believe the first one, and I had spent 2 weeks in a state of cold, absolute panic, during which Ren had asked me, gently and repeatedly, what was wrong, and I had said nothing was wrong, and she had not believed me. But she had given me time, because Ren had always given me time. Because Ren had always understood that some things had to be approached from your own direction or not at all. And then I had made the decision. I had decided that telling her would destroy her. I had decided that telling her would destroy us. I had decided that the kind thing, the brave thing, the thing that would protect the woman I loved, was to leave before she had to know, to disappear into a city where I had a cousin who would let me stay, to start over with the child I had not intended and the life I had not chosen, and to release her from the obligation of having to forgive me for something that was unforgivable. I had told myself it was brave. I had been 28 years old, and I had told myself it was brave. I knew now, at 33, sitting in a parking lot with my daughter sleeping in the back seat and the temperature reading 46 degrees, that it had been the worst kind of cowardice. That it had been the cowardice of someone who could not bear to be seen failing. That what I had done to Ren Ivor was not protection. It had been theft. I had stolen 4 years and 7 months from her life. I had stolen the conversation she deserved to have, the choice she deserved to make, the version of grief that comes with an explanation instead of the version that comes with silence. She had asked me one question in the exam room. She had not asked me about Vida. She had not asked me who Vida's father was. She had not asked me whether I had been with someone, whether I had been in love with someone, whether I had built another life. She had asked me whether I lived in the city. She had asked me whether I was reachable. I sat in the parking lot and understood that Ren Ivor, after 4 years and 7 months of silence, had used the one professional minute she could justify with me to determine whether I was a person she could still find. I started the engine. I drove home. I made Vida lunch. I put her down for a nap. I sat on the couch in the living room of the small apartment I had rented 8 months ago when I had finally moved back to this city because I had decided, in a way I had not been able to admit to myself for years, that I could not raise my daughter in a place where she would never know the parts of me I had left behind. I had moved back. I had moved back knowing Ren lived here. I had not looked for her. I had told myself that not looking for her was respect, was distance, was the smallest kindness I could still offer. I had not anticipated that the universe would take a referral slip and put us in the same room before I had ever decided what I was going to do with the fact of being back in her city. My phone buzzed at 3:47 that afternoon. It was an unknown number. The message said, "This is Ren. I asked the front desk for your contact. I should not have. I will not use it again. I am sorry. W." I read the message 4 times. I sat with it for a long time. She had used the practice's administrative access to look up my number. She had then immediately confessed to having done it. She had told me she would not use the access again. She had apologized for the breach in the same message in which she had committed it. It was the most Ren thing she had ever done, the competence and the conscience operating at the same level, neither one suppressing the other, the honesty that did not ask for credit, the accounting that happened in the same breath as the action. I wrote back, after a long time, "Don't apologize. I'm glad you did." There was a long pause. The 3 dots appeared and then disappeared and then appeared again. She wrote, "I'd like to meet. Not today. Whenever you are ready. There is no rush." I read it. I sat with it. I thought about my daughter sleeping in the room down the hall, and the 4 years and 7 months I had spent away from this woman and the millimeter movement at the corner of her mouth when Vida had said, "I know about being brave." I wrote, "Saturday morning. Coffee. The place on 10th and Mercer if it's still there." She wrote, "It's still there. Saturday. What time?" I wrote, 9. She wrote, "I'll be there." That was Tuesday afternoon. Saturday was 4 days away. 4 days felt like a great deal of time and almost no time at all, which I understood was the specific texture of time when you are about to have a conversation you have been avoiding for 4 years and 7 months, and the universe has, with the indifferent cruelty of universes, scheduled it for you anyway. I spent Wednesday in a state I would not be able to describe later. I went through the motions. I took Vita to preschool. I went to work. I worked at a small design firm in the arts district, doing the kind of quiet, steady work that had absorbed me in the city I had escaped to and had followed me home when I came back. I made dinner. I read Vita her bedtime story. I sat on the couch afterward and looked at my phone and did not text Ren and did not look at Ren's name in my contacts where I had saved it under her initial and a small calendar emoji because I had not been ready to write the full word. On Thursday, I told my best friend, Lynn. Lynn and I had grown up together. Lynn had been the only person from my old life who had not given up on me, who had texted me in the city I had escaped to and had visited me, and had held my daughter when she was 8 days old, and had told me, after Vita was 3 months old, and I had finally been able to talk about it, that what I had done to Ren was the worst thing she had ever seen me do, and that she still loved me, and that those two facts were not in conflict. Lynn had been my best friend for 22 years. Lynn did not let me lie to myself. I told her in her kitchen while she made tea. She listened. She did not interrupt. When I had finished, she set the kettle down and looked at me with the steady, unsurprised attention of someone who had been waiting for this conversation since the day I told her I was moving back. She said, "You knew this was going to happen." I said, "I didn't know it was going to be her clinic." She said, "You knew you were going to see her again. Eventually. You moved back to the city she lives in. You knew this was going to happen one way or another." I said, "I didn't." She said, "Saram." I stopped. She said, "You moved back. You moved back. That's information. Don't pretend you don't know what you were doing." I sat at her kitchen table and looked at my hands. They were the hands of a 33-year-old woman with a wedding band she did not wear, and a daughter she loved more than her own breathing, and a 4-year and 7-month gap in her life that she had not yet found a way to seal. I said, "What do I tell her?" Lynn said, "The truth." I said, "Which part?" Lynn said, "All of it." I said, "She's going to hate me." Lynn said, "She's not going to hate you. Ren doesn't hate. Ren grieves and accounts and adjusts. That's what Ren does. She might never want to see you again, but she won't hate you. Ren is not built that way." I said, "You sound very sure." Lynn said, "I have been listening to you describe that woman for 10 years. I am very sure." I went home. I made dinner for Vita. I put her to bed. I sat on the couch and thought about Ren and the millimeter at the corner of her mouth, and the way she had asked me one question, and the way she had used her professional access and then immediately confessed it, and the way she had said, in a text on a Tuesday afternoon, "There is no rush." On Friday night, I could not sleep. I lay in bed for 2 hours and stared at the ceiling and thought about all the versions of this conversation I had rehearsed over the years, when I had told myself I would never have it, when I had let myself imagine I would. None of the rehearsed versions were going to be useful. None of the rehearsed versions had accounted for a woman who would, 4 years and 7 months after being ghosted by her partner, ask the question whether her partner was reachable before she asked the question of why her partner had left. Ren had asked the kind question first. I had not earned the kind question. I knew I had not earned it. The fact of it had been keeping me awake all week. Saturday morning came. I dropped Vita at Lynn's at 8:30. Vita loved Lynn. Vita had been calling Lynn Tia since she could form the word, because Lynn had been there since the beginning, because Lynn had been the auntie my daughter had been given in place of the family she did not have. Vita went happily. Lynn hugged me at the door and said, "Just listen to her. Don't perform. Don't manage. Just listen to her." I said, "Okay." She said, "Saram." I said, "Yeah." She said, "You can do this. You're not the person who left her. You're the person she's about to meet. I drove to 10th and Mercer. The coffee place on 10th and Mercer had been there since I was 19. It was the kind of small, slightly dim, slightly cluttered place that had survived the gentrification of 3 different neighborhood waves because the owner had been there longer than the waves had and had refused to update anything except the espresso machine. Ren and I had gone there on our second date. I had ordered a black coffee, and she had ordered the same, and we had sat at the small table by the window for 3 hours and talked about the kind of things you talk about on a second date, when you already know it is going to be more dates. I parked. I sat in the car for 90 seconds and made myself breathe. I walked in. She was already there. She was at a small table near the back, not the table by the window. She had chosen the quieter spot, because Ren had always chosen the quieter spot, because Ren had always understood that public conversations needed private corners. She was wearing dark jeans and a navy sweater, and her hair was down, no clip, and she was holding a cup of coffee with both hands like the cup was a small object she was being careful with. She looked up when the door chimed. She did not stand. She did not wave. She did the smallest version of a nod, just enough to let me know she had seen me, just enough to indicate the chair across from her. I walked over. I sat down. She had ordered me a coffee. Black. It was still steaming at the corner of the table on my side. She had ordered it before I arrived. She had remembered, after 4 years and 7 months, that I took my coffee black. I looked at the coffee. I looked at her. She said, "I didn't know if you still drank it the same way." I said, "I do." She said, "Good." There was a long silence. The coffee shop hummed around us. Saturday morning, people reading newspapers and looking at laptops, the espresso machine going, someone laughing in the corner. It was the kind of warm, specific quiet that this place had been generating for 30 years. She said, "Thank you for coming." I said, "Thank you for asking." She said, "I have been trying to decide what I want from this conversation since Tuesday afternoon. I have not yet decided. I want to tell you that, because if I do not say it out loud, I will pretend I have a plan, and I do not have a plan." I said, "Okay." She said, "So I am going to ask the questions as they come to me. You can answer them or not answer them. You don't owe me answers. I am not interrogating you. I am asking because I have wondered for 4 years and 7 months, and I would like to know." I said, "Ask whatever you want." She said, "Are you sure?" I said, "I am sure. I owe you every answer to every question. That is the smallest thing I owe you." She looked at me. I watched her absorb that. The composure was working hard. I could see it in the corners, the slight tightness at the jaw, the steadiness of the hands around the cup. The way her gaze did not slide off mine, even though I knew, from years of knowing her, that not sliding off mine was costing her something specific. She said, "Why did you leave?" I took a breath. I said, "Because I was pregnant." She did not move. She did not move. She did not gasp. She did not pull back. She held the cup of coffee with both hands, and she looked at me with the absolute attention she had always brought to the things that mattered most, and she absorbed the information the way she absorbed everything, which was completely, with the surface still and the depth registering. After a long moment, she said, "And?" I said, "And the baby was not, could not have been, yours. Mine and yours, I mean. I had been with someone in February. Diego. You don't know him. He was an old friend who came to stay for a week. It was stupid and brief and meaningless. And I had been telling myself it was a thing that hadn't happened because we were solid, you and I. And the thing with Diego was so small in comparison that I thought I could not say anything, and it would go away. I stopped. I made myself keep going. I said, "And then I took the test in March." And I knew immediately. I knew it was Diego's. The timing was... There was no other math that worked. And I sat with that for 2 weeks, and I could not think. I could not see the situation clearly. I told myself that telling you would destroy you. I told myself the kindest thing I could do, the bravest thing, was to leave before you found out. So you wouldn't have to make the choice. So you wouldn't have to stand in our kitchen and decide whether you were going to forgive me or not. I told myself I was protecting you. I stopped. I said, I was not protecting you. I was a coward. I could not stand to be seen having done what I did. So I left. So I would not have to see your face when you knew. I stopped. I looked at her. She was looking at the table. She said, very quietly, "You thought I would not forgive you." I said, "I thought you might. I thought you would try. I thought you would do the Ren thing and account for it and try to find a way through it. I could not let you do that. Because if you did that and we tried and it failed, I would have destroyed 2 of us. And if it succeeded, I would have spent the rest of my life knowing what I had cost you. So I left. I decided for you." She said, "Yes. You decided for me." I said, "Yes." She said, "That was the wrong choice." I said, "I know." She said, "You don't get to make that choice for someone." I said, "I know." She looked up. Her eyes were the same. The seriousness of them. The thing in them that did not break even when the surface moved. Her composure was still working, but the cost of it was showing now, at the edges, in the way her hand had tightened around the cup. She said, "I would have stayed." I said, She said, "I want you to hear that. Not because it is what you want to hear. Because it is the truth. I would have stayed. I would have been hurt. I would have been angry. I would have asked you 1,000 questions. I would have grieved the version of our life that the affair took away from us. And I would have stayed. Because that is who I am, Saram. That is who I have always been. And you knew that. You knew that. And you decided I should not get to make the choice anyway. I had not cried in the parking lot on Tuesday. I had not cried at any point in the 4 years and 7 months. I had a daughter to raise and a life to maintain and a steady, gritted, functional adulthood to hold together, and I had not allowed myself to cry about Reniver in a way that would have required me to admit how badly I had broken what we had built. I cried at the small table in the back of the coffee shop on 10th and Mercer on a Saturday morning in November. Quietly, without sound. Just my face wet and my hands on the table and the cup of black coffee she had remembered to order me, sitting between us still untouched. Ren did not move. She did not reach across the table. She did not offer me a napkin. She did not do any of the things she would have done in another life when she was the person whose job it was to take care of me. She let me cry. It was the most precise act of restraint I had ever watched her perform. She let me sit in the consequences of what I had done without trying to make them smaller for me. She did not soften the moment. She did not redirect. She did not, and this was the part that broke me open, perform any version of being okay so that I could feel less responsible for what I had cost her. She just sat there, and she watched me with the same absolute attention she had brought to everything that had ever mattered to her, and she let me feel the full size of the thing I had done. When I had stopped, when I could breathe, she handed me a napkin from the small dispenser on the table. She did not say anything. I took the napkin. She said, "I have one more question for today. Just one. I would like to come back to the rest, if you are willing, but today I want to ask one more thing." I said yes. She said, "Did you ever, at any point in those 4 years and 7 months, almost call me?" I said, "Yes." She said, "When?" I said, "Vita's first birthday, Lynn's wedding, the night I moved back to the city, Every time my mother called me, the day I signed the lease on the apartment. The first time Vita said the word for water, and it sounded like the way my grandmother said it. The morning I found a photo of you in a box I hadn't unpacked yet from the move. Many other times. She absorbed it. She said, "Thank you." She said, "I am going to go now. Not because I am angry, because I need to sit with this for a while. I am asking, and you can say no, but I am asking if I can text you on Monday. Just to say I am still thinking. Just so that the silence after this conversation does not become another silence between us. I do not want another silence between us. I would rather know the shape of a difficult conversation than be alone with the shape of one I am imagining." I said, "Yes, please." She stood. She gathered her coat from the chair beside her. She put on the coat carefully and slowly, the way Ren did everything, the way Ren had always done everything. She said, "Saram." I said, "Yeah." She said, "Your daughter is beautiful." I said, "Thank you." She said, "She has your jaw." I said, "She has Diego's jaw actually, but she has my mother's eyes, which I think is what you saw on Tuesday." She nodded. She said, "I would like to meet her properly. Someday. If you are willing. Not as her doctor. We will need to transfer her to one of my colleagues. That is not negotiable. It is the protocol. But if there comes a time when it would be all right with you, I would like to know her. Eventually." I said, "Yes." She said, "Not yet. I am not asking yet. I am just telling you the direction." I said, "I understand." She put her hands in her pockets. She looked at me one more time. The composure was holding. The thing underneath was visible now. In the careful way she was not letting it touch her hands or her voice. In the way she was getting herself out of this conversation before it cost her any more than it had already cost. She said, "Take care of yourself." I said, "You too." She left. I sat at the table for a long time after the door had chimed shut behind her. The coffee she had ordered me was cold. I drank it anyway. I drank it because she had remembered to order it, and because the small specific kindness of being known by someone after 4 years and 7 months of being a stranger was the thing I most needed and least deserved, and I was going to take it without pretending I did not need it. I drove to Lynn's. I picked up Vita. Lynn did not ask me how it went. Lynn handed me my daughter and looked at my face and said, "You're going to be okay." And then she said, "Both of you are going to be okay." I said, "I don't know yet." Lynn said, "I do." I drove home with Vita in the back seat. I made her lunch. I sat on the floor of the living room and built a tower out of wooden blocks with my daughter, who was 3 years and 9 months old, and had no idea that her morning at Aunt Lynn's had been the morning her mother had told the truth out loud for the first time to the only person whose forgiveness she had never permitted herself to ask for. On Monday morning at 9:14, exactly 1 week after I had walked into Ren's exam room with my sleeping daughter on my shoulder, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Ren. It said, "Still thinking. Still here." I sat on the kitchen counter with my coffee and read it. I read it 3 times. I wrote back, "Thank you for saying so. Still here too." The 3 dots appeared. They stayed for a long time, then they went away. She did not write back that day. She did not need to. The shape of the silence was different now. She wrote on Wednesday. It was a longer message than the Monday one. She said she was off on Saturday, and that if I had time for another coffee she would be glad of it, but that she also understood if I did not, and that I should not feel obligated to manage her by responding too quickly. She said she had thought about a great deal across the week, and she had a number of questions she would like to ask if I was willing, and that she would understand if I needed time. I wrote back inside 2 minutes. I said Saturday. I said 9 again. I said the same place if she did not mind, because the same place felt like the right structure to keep building inside. She wrote, "The same place is good." I put the phone down. I sat in the kitchen for a long time with the second cup of coffee I had not asked for the universe to keep handing me. That night, after Vita was asleep, I sat on the floor of her room and watched her breathe for a while. She did this thing in her sleep, where she pressed her small hands together under her cheek, as if she were holding herself in a careful place where nothing could disturb her. She had been doing it since she was a year old. I had no idea where she had learned it. I had asked Lynn once, and Lynn had said that some children just came knowing how to take care of themselves, and that I should be grateful and not investigate. I thought about Wren and the question she had asked at the table, whether I had ever almost called her. I thought about the answer I had given, which had been honest, which had been only a partial list. I thought about all the smaller times I had not added to the list. The afternoon Vita had fallen and cut her chin, and I had sat in the urgent care waiting room and watched a pediatrician walk past who had moved the way Wren moved, and how I had been unable to breathe for several minutes. The morning my mother had called to tell me a cousin had died, and I had wanted, with a force that had surprised me, to hear Wren's voice telling me the practical things that would have to happen next, because Wren had always been the one who knew the practical things. I had built a life in the city I had escaped to. I had built a job and an apartment and a small social life and a network of women who had been good to me and a routine that had carried me through 3 Christmases and 4 birthdays and the ordinary, unromantic stretches of single motherhood. None of that life had been a lie. All of it had been real. And underneath all of it, there had been a low, constant hum I had not named for myself because I had not had a way to name it without admitting what the name was. Wren was the name. I had carried Wren around inside me for 4 years and 7 months, the way you carry a small radio you cannot turn off. Sometimes the station was clear, and sometimes it was static, and sometimes I had managed not to listen for weeks at a time, but the radio had been on. The radio had been on the whole time. Saturday came. I dropped Vita at Lynn's again. Lynn did not ask. Lynn handed me a small paper bag that turned out to contain a muffin from the bakery near her apartment, and said, "This is in case you forget to eat." I said, "I'm just going to coffee." Lynn said, "You're going to forget to eat. Take it." I took it. The coffee shop was the same. The owner was at the counter. The same espresso machine was running. The same small table at the back was empty. Wren was not there yet. I got my own coffee this time because I had arrived first, and because the ritual of her ordering for me had been a specific moment for the first conversation, and I did not want to repeat it as if it had been a thing we did. She came in at 5 minutes past 9, which was unusual for her. She was a woman who arrived at the time she had said she would arrive, and not a minute later. The 5 minutes felt like a signal. The signal was, I was not as composed as I would prefer to be this morning. She sat down. She set her coffee on the table. She looked tired. She said, "I want to apologize for one thing before we start." I said, "Okay." She said, "On Tuesday, in the exam room, the way I asked you whether you lived in the city. That was a professional question with a personal motive, and I did not separate them properly. I should not have used the appointment to investigate that. I am sorry." I said, "You apologized for the phone number on Tuesday afternoon. I forgave you on Tuesday afternoon. You don't have to apologize for it again on Saturday." She said, "I know. I am apologizing for the question too. They are 2 different breaches." I looked at her. She had the small, careful seriousness she got when she was trying very hard to be fair, which on Wren had always read to me as more vulnerable than other people's vulnerability, because it required effort she did not have to make. I said, "Okay. Apology accepted." She said, "Thank you." She drank some of her coffee. She said, I have a list of questions. I wrote them down because I knew I would forget them if I did not. I am going to ask them in the order they happened. You can answer as much or as little as you want. Some of them are not your fault to answer. Some of them are mine. I will be clear when one is mine. I said, okay. She said, where did you go? I said, to Tucson. My cousin Mari lived there. She had a guest room. She was the only person in the family I had told I was thinking about leaving. She said, how long were you there? I said, 4 years. I moved back in April. She said, and in Tucson, what did you do? I said, I worked at a small design firm, the same kind of work I do now. I made friends slowly. I raised Vida. I went to the playground a lot. I learned how to be a mother by figuring it out, the way most people learn it, in small embarrassing pieces. She said, did Diego? Was he involved? I said, no. I told him about Vida when she was 6 months old. I did not tell him before because I did not know what I wanted from him, and I needed to decide before I gave him an opportunity to decide. When I told him, he was surprised, polite. He offered to be involved in whatever capacity I wanted. I said I wanted financial support, and I wanted him to be available as a name in her life when she was old enough to ask. He has been those things. He has met her twice. He lives in Mexico City, and he sends a card on her birthday, and he calls her on FaceTime once a month, and that is the shape of him in her life. He has a wife now. She is kind. The kindness is partly performance and partly real, and I have made my peace with it being both. She said, that sounds workable. I said, it is workable. It is also small. He is not her father in the way I think of fathers. He is a man whose name is on her birth certificate. That is the entirety of the relationship. She said, was that a deliberate choice? I said, on both sides. He has been clear that he does not want to be a primary parent. I have been clear that I am her primary parent. We made the small version on purpose. She nodded. She was making mental notes, I could tell. She was filing things in the careful interior file system she had always maintained, where she kept the operational facts about the people she cared about. She said, the next question is mine. I am going to ask you something, and I want to be clear that this is my question, not yours. I said, okay. She said, did you ever consider coming back? Not to me. To this city. To the place you used to live. Did you ever consider that as something that could happen? I said, yes. Frequently. She said, what stopped you for 4 years? I said, you. She said, me how? I said, I could not figure out the math of being in a city where I might run into you. I could not figure out how to be in the same physical space as you without owing you the conversation we are having now. And I could not have the conversation we are having now until... I do not know exactly. Until something in me had finished a piece of work I did not have a name for. Until Vida was old enough that I had stopped being entirely a survival machine and had started being a person again. Until I felt like a person who could account for what I had done without falling apart in front of the person I had done it to. She said, you moved back in April, 8 months ago. I said, yes. She said, so whatever you were waiting for, it finished sometime around then. I said, yes. Around then. She said, what was it? I sat with the question for a long time. The coffee shop hummed around us. A child was laughing at the front of the shop about something her father had said. The espresso machine was going. I said, Vida turned 3. And one of the things that happens when a child turns 3 is that they start to ask the kind of questions that require you to have answers. She does not yet ask about you specifically because she does not know about you, but she asks about where I am from. She asks about who my mother is. She asks about whether I had a friend when I was little. She is starting to build a model of me as a person who existed before she existed. And I realized I could not keep building that model out of the version of my life I had constructed in Tucson, because that version of my life had a hole in it. And the hole had your name on it. And at some point she was going to be old enough to look at me and see the hole, and she was going to ask me what was missing, and I was going to have to either lie to her or tell her the truth. And I had decided I was not going to lie to my daughter. I stopped. I said, so I moved back. I told myself I was moving back because of school options and family and the design firm. All of those reasons were also true, but underneath them was the fact that I was preparing to be a person who could tell my daughter the truth about who I was, and being that person required me to be in a city where you also existed. She said, "You moved back to make yourself accountable to your daughter." I said, "Yes, and to you." But the first one was the version I let myself say out loud. She absorbed it. She said, "Thank you for telling me that." I said, "Thank you for asking." She said, "I have a few more." I said, "Okay." She said, "Are you in a relationship?" I said, "No. I have not been in a relationship since you. I have been on 3 dates in 4 years. None of them led anywhere. I did not pursue them. I did not want to." She said, "Why?" I said, "Because I had decided, sometime in the first year, that the thing I had broken with you was the thing I had been planning to spend my life inside, and that I was not going to try to reconstruct it with someone else who did not know what the first version had been. It would have been unfair to that person, and it would have been unfair to the memory of what you and I had been." She said, "That is a lonely way to live for 4 years." I said, "It was a lonely way to live for 4 years." "Yes." She said, "I am sorry." I said, "You don't have to apologize for my loneliness. I built it." She said, "I am sorry anyway." I looked at her. The composure was holding. The composure was always going to hold, because Ren was who Ren was. But underneath it I could see something I had not seen on Tuesday or at the first coffee. I could see that she had been carrying the same kind of weight in the same kind of way for the same length of time. Different shape, same weight. I said, "Can I ask you something now?" She said, "Yes." I said, "What did you do?" "In the 4 years and 7 months, after I disappeared." She set her cup down. She said, "I looked for you for the first 6 weeks. I called your mother. I called Lynn. I called Mari, actually, but she would not tell me where you were. She was kind about it. She said she could not tell me where you were, and she could not tell me you were okay. She said the only thing she could tell me was that you were alive, and that you had asked her not to give your location. So I stopped calling Mari. I called the police once, the second week, and they listened politely and explained that an adult woman who chose to leave a relationship was not a missing person. I knew that. I called anyway because I had run out of options. After 6 weeks, I stopped looking. I decided that you had made a choice, and that I had to respect the choice even though I did not understand it. I went back to work. I had been about to start the pediatric fellowship that year. I started it. I finished it. I joined this practice 3 years ago. She paused. She said, "I dated one person. For 7 months. About 2 years in. She was kind. She was patient. She was not you. I broke up with her because she said something one night, which she did not mean unkindly. She said she felt like she was always sharing me with someone who was not in the room. I told her she was right, and that it was not going to change. I broke it off cleanly. We are still friends. She is married now. I went to her wedding." She paused. She said, "I did not look for you again. I assumed you had moved on. I assumed you had built a life. I did not know about Vita. I had not let myself wonder, because wondering was a kind of contact, and I had decided contact was not what you wanted." She paused. she said. On Tuesday, when you walked into my office, the first thing I understood, before any other thing, was that you had not moved on. Because the woman who walked into my office was not a woman who had moved on. She was a woman who had been doing a very controlled, very disciplined version of not moving on for years, and she was standing in front of me with a child on her shoulder, and the child was clearly hers, in a way that took the situation I had constructed in my head and dismantled it. She paused. She said, "I am telling you that because I want you to know that I did not look at you in the exam room and see the woman who had abandoned me. I looked at you and saw a woman who had been carrying something for a very long time, by herself, in a way I would not have wished on you. I am angry about what you did. I am very angry. And I also saw, immediately, that you have already been paying for it. And I am not interested in adding to the bill. Whatever happens between us, that is my position. I am not here to make you pay. I am here to understand." I did not cry this time. I had cried last week. I had a daughter to pick up in an hour, and I could not arrive at Lynn's apartment with the kind of face that would tell Lynn I had cried. I sat with what Wren had said, and I let it move through me without trying to redirect it, because Wren had not redirected anything I had said to her. And the small specific dignity of being met that way was something I was going to honor by sitting still and absorbing it the same way. I said, "Thank you." She said, "You are welcome." She said, "One more question. This is the last one for today." I said, "Okay." She said, "What do you want?" I said, "From you?" She said, "From this. From the fact that we are in the same city. From the fact that we are sitting at this table. What do you want?" I sat with the question. I did not perform sitting with it. I actually did not know the answer in a clean form, and I needed a moment. I said, "I want to know you again. I do not know in what shape. I do not know what is fair to ask for, given what I have done. I do not want to assume anything, but I want you to be a person in my life again, in whatever shape is honest. I am not asking for the shape we used to have. I am not asking you to forgive me on a timeline. I am telling you, that I would like to know you. And I would like, eventually, for you to know Vida. Not because she is part of the negotiation, because you are the kind of person who deserves to know the people I love, and Vida is the person I love." She said, "Okay." I said, "Okay." She said, "Okay. I would like that too. I want to be careful with it. I do not want to rush. I do not trust my own pace on this, because I have wanted you back in some form for a long time, and I do not want to confuse the wanting with what is actually good for either of us. So I am going to ask you to let me set the pace. And I will tell you when I do not know what the right pace is, that I do not know. And we will figure it out." I said, "Yes. Whatever pace you set." She said, "And I will need you to tell me, also, when something is not working. I do not want to manage this by myself. I did that for 4 years, and it was a mistake. I want us to share the work this time." I said, "Yes." She said, "And one structural thing. Vida cannot be my patient. I have transferred her file to Dr. Aaron Holt, who is one of my colleagues, who is excellent, who is the doctor I would send my own niece to. Aaron will be in touch with you to confirm the transfer. This is non-negotiable. It would not be appropriate." I said, "I understand." She said, "Good." She drank the last of her coffee. She said, "I am going to go now. I have a shift at noon. But I would like to do this again, next Saturday. Same place, if you are willing." I said, "Yes." She said, "And in between, text me if you want to. Or do not. I will text you. We will figure out the rhythm." I said, "Okay." She stood up. She put on her coat. She paused at the table for 1 extra second, looking at me, and I watched her face do the thing it had done on Tuesday. The millimeter movement at the corner of her mouth, the smallest possible adjustment behind the eyes. And then she nodded, just once, and she walked out. I sat at the table for a long time afterward. I did not drink the rest of my coffee. I sat with the muffin Lynn had given me, untouched in its paper bag, and I thought about the question Wren had asked me about what I wanted and the answer I had given and the careful structure she had laid down in response. The pace, the structural rule about Vida, the willingness to do the work together this time. She had been thinking about the structure all week. She had come into the coffee shop with a plan. The plan was not romantic. The plan was operational. The plan was what a person who genuinely wanted to try something difficult did when they were taking the difficulty seriously instead of pretending it would resolve itself. The next several weeks went the way she had said they would. We texted in small ways. The weather. A book she had read that she thought I might like. A photograph I sent her of Vida's drawing of a giraffe, which Vida had insisted was an excellent giraffe even though it had only 3 legs. Wren wrote back that the giraffe was outstanding and that the missing leg gave it character. Vida, when I read her the text, looked very serious and said, "I knew it was a good giraffe. I told her Dr. Ivor had excellent taste in giraffes." Vida said, "Who is Dr. Ivor?" I said, "A friend of mine who is also a doctor." Vida said, "Is she nice?" I said, "Yes." Vida said, "Good." That was the entirety of Vida's first conversation about Wren. We had coffee the second Saturday and the third. The third Saturday, Wren ordered the coffee again, because we had moved past the moment when ordering it had been a charged thing, and into the moment where ordering it was just a small kindness one of us did for the other. She started telling me about her work, about the children she saw, about the pediatric fellowship and what she had learned in it. I told her about Vida, the small specific things, the way Vida was, the things that had surprised me about being a parent, the things that had not. She listened the way she listened, which was to say completely. On the 4th Saturday, I asked her about the woman she had dated. She told me. The woman's name was Teresa. Wren told me the shape of the relationship and the shape of its ending and the version of herself she had been inside it. She did not minimize Teresa. She did not perform regret. She said the relationship had been an honest attempt at something she had wanted to want and could not entirely want, and that Teresa had been kind to her about that, and that she was grateful that someone had spent 7 months teaching her what it looked like to be loved by a person who was actually present, even when she could not return it. I said, "I'm glad she was kind to you." Wren said, "So am I." The 5th Saturday, Wren asked if I would like to bring Vida to the park near her apartment some weekend morning. She said it without weight. She said the park was good. She said she would not be there as a doctor. She would be there as a friend, and that we did not have to call it anything more than that for Vida. She said if I was not ready, the offer would still be there in a month. I said, "Next Sunday." She said, "Next Sunday." I told Lynn that night. Lynn said, "You're going to introduce them." I said, "Carefully." Lynn said, "Yes, carefully, but you're going to do it." I said, "Yes." Lynn said, "How do you feel about it?" I said, "Like I am building something I do not entirely have the materials for and the building is happening anyway." Lynn said, "That is what every honest thing feels like at the beginning." The Sunday at the park was simple. It was a small park near Wren's apartment with a swing set and a low climbing structure and a fountain that, in late November, had been turned off for the season. Wren was there when we arrived, sitting on a bench with 2 cups of coffee and a small paper bag that turned out to contain a hot chocolate for Vida and a cookie shaped like a leaf. Vida looked at the cookie. Vida looked at me. I said, "This is my friend Wren. She wanted to meet you." Vida considered Wren with the small evaluating stillness she had inherited from somewhere. She said, "You are the doctor with the giraffe." Wren said, "I am." Vida said, The giraffe needed 3 legs because she lost one in a fight with a lion. Ren said, "That is a story I had not heard. I am glad to know." Vita said, "The lion was sorry afterward." Ren said, "That sounds like a kind lion." Vita said, "He was. He brought her a new leg, but it was the wrong size." Ren said, "And what did the giraffe do?" Vita said, "She kept the wrong leg as a souvenir and grew used to 3. Ren said, "That sounds like a wise giraffe." Vita said, "She was." Vita ate the cookie. Vita drank the hot chocolate. Vita went to the swings. Ren and I sat on the bench and watched her swing, and we did not say very much, because there was not very much that needed to be said. The morning was cold and clear, and the sound of Vita laughing on the swings was the small specific sound of a child who did not know she was inside an enormous careful moment and was just having a regular Sunday. After about an hour, Vita came back to the bench and announced she was cold. We walked back to my car. Ren walked us. At the car, she crouched down to Vita's level and said, "It was very nice to meet you." Vita said, "You can come to the park again." Ren said, "I would like that." Vita said, "Bring another cookie." Ren said, "I will." Vita got into the car seat. I buckled her in. I closed the door. Ren and I stood on the curb for a moment. She said, "She's wonderful." I said, "She is." She said, "You did that." I said, "I did that." She said, "You did well." I said, "Thank you." She said, "Drive safe." I drove home. Vita fell asleep in the car seat halfway home. I put her down for a nap and sat on the couch and breathed for a long time. Ren and I kept seeing each other. Coffees on Saturdays, texts during the week. 2 more park mornings with Vita, in which Vita came to consider Ren as a fixture in the Sunday morning category, and stopped asking who she was and started asking when she was coming. We did not put a label on what we were. We did not need to yet. We were 2 adults who were learning how to be in each other's lives again, with a small person attached, and we were doing it slowly because slowly was the only way the thing was going to hold. The conversation that changed it happened on a Saturday in late January. We were at the coffee shop. We had been meeting for 9 weeks. Ren had been wearing the Lisbon clip every time. I had not mentioned it. I had not asked her whether she knew I had noticed. The Lisbon clip was an artifact, and the artifact was doing its own work, and I had decided to let it. She said, "I have something I want to say." I said, "Okay." She said, "I have been thinking about what we are doing, about the shape of this, about what I want from it." I said, "Okay." She said, "I want to tell you something, and I want to be clear that I am not asking you to respond in any particular way. I am telling you because I think you deserve to know what I am thinking, and I think I have been carrying it long enough that not telling you has started to feel like the kind of management I told you I would not do this time." I said, "Tell me." She said, "I am still in love with you." She said it the way she had said everything else. Flatly, without performance, without weight on any particular word. The composure was holding. The thing underneath was visible. I said, "Ren?" She said, "Let me finish. I am still in love with you, and I have been the entire time." I did not stop. I tried. I dated Teresa. I told myself I had moved on. I had not moved on. I had constructed a functional life on top of the not moving on, and I had done it well enough that I had almost convinced myself. On Tuesday in the exam room, when you walked in with Vita on your shoulder, the thing I had been pretending was over became something I could no longer pretend was over. And I have been working all week, for 9 weeks actually, to figure out what to do with that. I said, "Ren." She said, "I am not finished. I want to tell you the rest before you say anything." I said, "Okay." She said, "I am in love with you. And I do not think we should act on it yet. I do not mean ever. I mean yet. I mean, I have watched you for 9 weeks be exactly the person I always thought you were, which is someone who tells the truth when it costs her, and someone who shows up when it would be easier not to, and someone who is a good mother and a good friend and a careful person. And I love that person. I have always loved that person. And I am also aware that the wound between us is not closed. It is closing. It is closing well. But it is not closed. And I do not want to act on what I am feeling until I am sure that I am acting because I want you, and not because I am tired of being careful. She paused. She said, I want us to keep doing what we are doing. I want to keep meeting on Saturdays. I want to keep being in Vita's life slowly. I want to give this time. And I want you to know. I want you to know that the time I am asking for is not me deciding. It is me being responsible to the decision I have already made. She paused. She said, I am telling you this because I do not want you to wonder. I do not want you to spend any more time wondering whether I am here for you. I am here for you. I am asking for time, not because I am unsure of you, but because I am sure of you, and I want to do this right. She finished. She drank some of her coffee. I looked at her for a long time. I said, I love you too. She said, I know. I said, I have loved you the whole time. She said, I know that too. I said, I will wait as long as you need to wait. She said, thank you. I said, and I want to say something also. Because you said yours and I want to say mine. She said, yes. I said, I am not going to leave again. I want you to know that. I am not going to manage you out of a difficult thing by removing myself from it. If we get to a point where I am scared, I am going to tell you, I am scared. If we get to a point where this is harder than I can handle, I am going to ask you to help me handle it instead of disappearing. I am going to do the work I should have done at 28. I am going to do it now, at 33. With you and with my daughter and with the life I have built. I am not going to leave. She said, Saram? I said, yeah. She said, I believe you. I said, thank you. She said, that is the most important thing you have said to me yet. We sat in the small back table at the coffee shop on 10th and Mercer for a long time. We finished our coffees. We ordered second ones. We did not say very much. We did not need to. When we walked out, on the sidewalk in the cold January light, Ren stopped at the curb. She turned to me. She said, may I? I said, yes. She lifted her hand. She touched my jaw. Briefly. Not a kiss. Not yet. Just the warm, careful palm of her hand against my jaw for 1 second, which was, I understood as it happened, the first piece of physical contact between us in 4 years and 7 months. Her hand was warm. Her thumb moved once, the smallest possible movement, against my cheekbone. She said, there, that is for now. I said, okay. She said, the rest is for later. I said, okay. She dropped her hand. We walked to her car. She drove home. I drove home. Vita was at Lynn's. I picked her up. Lynn looked at my face when she opened the door and said, something happened. I said, a small good thing. Lynn said, how small? I said, small enough that I am not going to talk about it yet. Big enough that I am going to tell you about it next week. Lynn said, good. The spring came. We kept meeting. Saturdays at the coffee shop, Sunday mornings at the park. More often now, the cookies escalating into small picnics in March when the weather turned. Vita had decided that Ren was a permanent fixture, and Vita had started incorporating Ren into the small narratives she told about her life. At preschool, she had told her teacher that her mom had a friend named Dr. Ivor, who knew about giraffes. The teacher had repeated this to me at pickup with the polite, slightly curious neutrality of a woman who had registered a piece of information and filed it. We had dinner together for the first time in April. At my apartment. Ren cooked, because Ren had always been the better cook between us, and because she had asked. and because I had decided that letting her into my kitchen was the next step. Vida ate the chicken Ren made. Vida pronounced it acceptable. Vida went to bed at her bedtime, and Ren and I sat on the couch in my living room afterward and talked for 2 hours, and when she left at 10, she did not kiss me, because she had said the rest was for later, and later had not arrived yet. Later arrived in May. It arrived at the end of a long Saturday, during which Vida had spent the morning at the park with us, and the afternoon at Lynn's. And Ren and I had walked the length of the riverfront downtown together in the warm spring evening, and we had ended up back at my apartment because she had said she would help me put together a bookshelf that had been in pieces in my living room for 6 weeks. She had put together the bookshelf. I had handed her screws. We had laughed about the instructions, which had been written in a Scandinavian style that assumed a degree of intuition the manufacturer had not provided. When the bookshelf was finished, we sat on the floor in front of it. The light through the window was the gold color spring light gets at the end of a long day. She said, "Saram." I said, "Yeah." She said, "I think later is now." I said, "Are you sure?" She said, "I am sure. I have been sure for some weeks. I was waiting to be sure that I was sure. I am." I said, "Okay." She turned. She lifted her hand. She touched my jaw the way she had touched it on the curb in January, with the same warm, careful palm, with the same small movement of the thumb against the cheekbone. She kissed me. It was not frantic. It was the opposite of frantic. It was patient and careful, and the kiss of a woman who had been thinking about this kiss for some unknowable amount of time and was finally letting herself have it. Her hand stayed at my jaw. Her other hand settled at my waist and stayed there like a small, definite promise. She kissed me slowly, and she kissed me thoroughly, and she kissed me like she was relearning the shape of my mouth on purpose. When she stopped, her forehead rested against mine. She said, "I missed you." I said, "I missed you too." She said, "I am going to ask you something." I said, "Okay." She said, "May I stay tonight?" I said, "Vida is..." She said, "I know. I am not asking for that. I am asking if I can stay. On the couch. In your apartment. So that when Vida wakes up tomorrow, I am there. So that we start the next morning together, not separately. I am asking the small version of the question, not the big version." I said, "Yes." She said, "The big version is for later. When we have figured out how to introduce it to Vida in a way that does not confuse her. There is no rush." I said, "Okay." She stayed. She slept on the couch under the blanket I gave her. Vida came out of her room at 6:45 in the morning, walked into the living room, and stopped at the sight of Ren on the couch with the blanket up to her chin. Vida said, "You stayed." Ren said, "I did." Vida said, "Why?" Ren said, "Because your mom and I stayed up talking late and I was too tired to drive home." Vida considered this. Vida said, "That is what Tia Lin did one time." Ren said, "It happens." Vida said, "Are you going to make breakfast?" Ren said, "I can. What would you like?" Vida said, "Pancakes." Ren said, "I can do pancakes." Vida said, "With the blueberries?" Ren said, "With the blueberries." Vida walked over and climbed up onto the couch next to Ren. She arranged the blanket over both of them. She said, "5 more minutes first." Ren said, "5 more minutes." I stood in the doorway of the kitchen with my coffee and watched my daughter share a couch blanket with the woman I had ghosted 4 years and 7 months earlier, and I understood that the morning was the small, specific shape of a life I had not earned and was being given anyway, and that the only thing I owed in exchange was to keep doing the work I had promised to do, which was to stay, which was to not leave. That summer, in July, I went to Lynn's wedding anniversary party with Ren. It was the first public thing we did together. It was at Lynn's house. There were maybe 30 people there. Most of them had known both of us at 25. Most of them had asked at some point over the years what had happened. Most of them had stopped asking. We walked in together. Ren had her hand in mine. We were not performing. We were just walking in. Lynn's husband, Tomas, opened the door. He looked at Ren. He looked at me. He looked at our hands. He looked at Lynn, who was behind him in the hall. Lynn looked at us. Lynn's face did the thing it had been doing for 22 years, which was to register a significant event without making a public production of it. Lynn said, "Come in, there's wine. I made the small cakes Ren likes." Ren said, "You made the..." Lynn said, "Yes." Ren said, "Lynn." Lynn said, "Come inside. The cakes are on the counter." We went inside. Ren found the cakes. Ren ate one of the cakes. She turned to me with the smallest visible piece of composure cracking I had ever seen on her face, which was almost a real smile, and she said, "She made the orange cakes. She made the orange cakes from the place in Lisbon, from the recipe I gave her at your birthday in 2020. I said, "I know." She said, "How long has she been planning this?" I said, "Lynn has been planning this since I told her you and I were having coffee." Ren said, "That was in November." I said, "That was in November." Ren ate the orange cake. The corner of her mouth did the thing. She did not stop me when I leaned in and kissed her, briefly in Lynn's kitchen, in front of 30 people who had known us at 25 and had given up on asking what had happened. The kiss was small. The kiss was public. Neither of us flinched. Lynn, on the other side of the kitchen, said to her husband quietly, "I told you." Tomas said, "You did." That fall, in October, Ren moved into the apartment with me and Vita. We made the move carefully. We talked about it for months first. We talked about it with Vita. We told Vita that Ren was going to come live with us because Ren and Mom loved each other and wanted to share a home. Vita listened. Vita considered. Vita said, "Will she still be the doctor who knows about giraffes?" We said yes. Vita said, "Will she still make pancakes with the blueberries?" We said yes. Vita said, "Okay." Vita went back to her drawing. Vita is 6 now. She is in 1st grade. She is reading at a 3rd grade level, which Ren is unbearable about. In the small, specific way Ren is unbearable about Vita's accomplishments. She still draws giraffes with 3 legs. She has decided, recently, that Ren is not just Dr. Ivor. She has started calling her, on the small days, Mama Ren, which was Vita's invention and not anything we had asked for. Ren had cried the first time. She had not let Vita see her cry. She had cried in the kitchen afterward, with my arms around her, in the small 10 seconds it took her to put the composure back on for Vita's sake. Then she had gone back into the living room and read Vita a book about a giraffe, and the giraffe in the book had 4 legs, but Vita had explained that the book was about a different giraffe. We are not married yet. We are talking about it. Ren has said she wants to. I have said I want to. We are taking it slowly because we have learned, the hard way, that we are better at the slow version of things than the fast version. We have a calendar on the kitchen wall, and a routine and a small, careful life, and a daughter who is the most loved child either of us has ever met. We have a coffee shop on 10th and Mercer where we still go on Saturday mornings, which is the same coffee shop where, on a Saturday in November, when we were still strangers to ourselves, Ren had ordered me a black coffee and I had told her the worst thing I had ever done, and she had not left. She had not left. That was the part I keep coming back to. Not what she said. Not what she forgave. Not the kiss in the spring or the morning with the pancakes or the orange cakes in Lynn's kitchen. The part I keep coming back to is the moment on a Saturday in November when she had heard the worst thing I had ever done, and she had absorbed it the way she absorbed everything, and she had not left. She had not left. And she had asked for the pace, and she had built the structure with me, and she had been right about all of it. I had ghosted her in March of the year my daughter was conceived because I had been 28 years old and afraid of being seen. And 4 years and 7 months later, I had walked into her exam room with my sleeping daughter on my shoulder. And the universe had given me the chance to do the thing I had not done at 28, which was to stay, to tell the truth, to stand in a room with the person I had hurt and not leave when it got hard. I had stayed. She had stayed. We had stayed together, slowly and carefully and on purpose, and the staying had been the only thing that mattered. And the staying was, every morning when I made the coffee and she made the pancakes, and Vita came out of her bedroom and climbed onto the couch with us under the blanket. The staying was the small specific shape of the life we had finally, after a very long detour, built.